Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Mark Parsons, and I am in this capacity representing CoData, and because CoData is taking a strong interest in coordinating polar work, but unfortunately we made this session sound polar. It's not polar, because these are global problems that we're addressing. And the basic issue is that there are major science initiatives that spin up and require all sorts of coordination, and they require consistent data, and we as data professionals are obligated to work within these different systems. And in many cases, I know when I was at a repository, we would be supporting many different large science initiatives. So we have the UN Ocean Decade going on, for example. There's well, we'll hear more about some things going on. So there's a lot of these things, and these projects have requirements. And they often, and what we're also seeing here in this meeting, there are collaborative things that we would like to be able to be standardized around so we could be more interoperable across interdisciplinary repositories and so forth. So for example, the CoData CDIF initiative, the cross-domain interoperability framework, which I think is pretty spiffy, and it actually aligns well with a lot of the work that people are already doing. But it's always more work. And so you're always stuck in this position. I know when I was at a repository, you have your immediate clients, the people who are knocking on your door and are submitting data or wanting data, and they often have been doing things the way they've been doing things for decades, and they like it that way. And then on the other hand, you have these big initiatives that are trying to be more cohesive and try to bring standards to the thing. And sometimes your community couldn't care less about those sorts of things. And so you have this tension between standardization and customization in a very generic sense. And so that's what we're going to be doing in this session, is trying to tease out those tensions and figure out ways that we can address them in a way that actions that we can take that help us both customize and standardize. So try and find that intersection, that sweet spot where we can accomplish more than the sum of the parts, if you will. So we're going to start with two presentations just to sort of set the stage. And so we're coming from a polar perspective, but don't get hung up about the polar piece, because I think one, polar is just a region, so it's very interdisciplinary, and so it has a lot of the issues that other regions would have or other disciplines would have in terms of reaching across disciplines. But also, I can say, quite frankly, that the polar community often can be rather insular. They work great within their own little world, but they're not necessarily connecting to the broader world. And at the same time, the broader world is maybe not aware of innovations that are happening in the polar world. And I think you could pick a region, pick a domain, and you would find that same sort of story. So we're just using sort of polar as a case study, if you will, but I see it as a generic problem. So while these two presentations, and then most of the session we're going to actually be doing work. I want this to be a session where we are actually coming together with ideas and so forth, and I will talk more about that after the presentations and give you all prompts. But just so you all are aware, you will need, we're going to go into breakouts. Maybe we'll do 2 breakouts in here. It might be worthwhile. Maybe we'll just do 1. See how it shapes up. But from the session description, you'll see a link to breakout notes, and so a couple of us will need to be getting in there because you're going to be charged to do things and be writing things down. So just to give you a heads up. But to start things off, I forget who's going first. Okay. So Peter Pulsifer will be speaking on behalf of Chantelle Verhey, who I believe is online hearing us. We can't hear her, unfortunately. And then we will go from there. So take it away, Peter. Oh, can we get the slides up on the main screen? No, it's not. Do I have to put it in presenter mode or something?
Just maybe put it in presentation mode. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Okay, great.
All right. Thank you, Mark, and thanks for joining us, everybody. So I am, as Mark said, presenting on behalf of my colleague Chantelle Verhey. Chantelle is the current chair or co-chair of the Arctic Data Committee that I'm going to tell you a bit about. And I was chair of that committee from its founding in 2014 till 2022. So the Arctic Data Committee was actually formed primarily coming out of work that was led by Mark and Taco de Bruin, who are here with us in the last International Polar Year, which is a big global initiative. Many countries around the world working together to move forward on polar research. And what that did was it really made us recognize the need to coordinate. And so coming out of that International Polar Year, there was some work done on a policy, data policies and so on, and that also formed the committee. And really what it tries to do is focus more on the human side of things and the organizational side of things. It does touch all of the technology and the methods and what we do as data stewards and so on. But what we were finding is there was a whole lot happening, as the title of this session implies. There's a whole lot going on, but it wasn't always connected. And so what I really focused on when we started up was how do we get all of these people, if not in the same room, at least on the same page. And so that resulted in a series of workshops, meetings, conferences, and so on, leading up to 2019 and the third Polar Data Forum, so a series of meetings called the Polar Data Forum. And actually in 2020, when COVID hit, we were all feeling that we were getting a lot of momentum, a lot was happening, and we didn't want to stop that. So we went to an online forum called the Polar to Global Online Interoperability and Data Sharing Hackathons. And it was really important to say that it was polar, but it's all about, as Mark says, connecting to the global system so that we're not doing this in isolation. And that was already happening. In fact, we co-located our meeting, I think, in 2017 with RDA in Montreal. We were starting to do that kind of thing. And as I'll talk about later, the next Polar Data Forum is next week in Hobart. And so we're really trying to bring this all together. And if you're interested, the next hackathon is online on November 20th. In addition to that human side of things, bringing people together, we really wanted as a group to do practical things as well. There were things going back like polar data search and bringing catalogs together that went back right to 2005. We have reports saying this is a priority, not only for the data folks, but for the researchers, for data users, and they weren't necessarily happening. So there are a number of initiatives that fall, roughly or loosely under the Arctic Data Committee umbrella, and one of them came out of the very first meeting, which is we didn't even know what our ecosystem looked like. So we have one called Mapping the Polar Data Ecosystem, and currently the latest funding for that has been under the Arctic Passion initiative in Europe, but it's been previously funded by some in Canada and National Science Foundation in the US and so on. And that's actually a database and a visualization of our ecosystem to try and say who are we and how are we connecting, and that's just been updated recently. The other is the Polar Data Search, formerly the Polar Federated Search. So Chantelle actually played a major leading role in that. And it took us from all of these disparate catalogs that weren't connected to a single endpoint that I think, last I heard, had over 50 catalogs feeding into it. So, the users don't have to go to each and every one of the repositories and so on. And it was done using various technologies, semantic web and so on to bring it all together. I won't go into all the details of the others, but there are others where people realize that the actual observing assets, so whether you're talking about buoys in the ocean, whether you're talking about weather stations, drones, whatever the case may be, there wasn't a lot happening there in terms of connecting that world to the data world. And so there's a really productive group called the Polar Observing Assets Working Group, and they have a new network that's set up, and they're starting to get into that really challenging problem or challenge of moving the sensors directly into the domain of the data management. And a number of others, including things like vocabularies and semantics, which we see at initiatives like this meeting here. And so that's where there's definitely connections. One of the key things that we did early on was policy, and this wasn't, for political reasons, we weren't allowed to call it a policy, so we called it a statement. And if you're interested in that, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards on that. But really, this is where we started to say, as a community, these are the things that matter to us. And we went into things like ethically open data, which touches on things like Indigenous data sovereignty, and the session that was in this room before this on sensitive data, all of those types of things. So it wasn't meant to be a how-to guide, but it was very much a principles guide. Here's what we think of as a community. That's being updated now. It's 12 years ago that we published it. And now we're looking at new things. A lot more is happening with Indigenous data sovereignty. We've got AI in the picture now, all of that. So that'll be released next year. We'll have a new version. And that's one of the things we're working on together as a community, and very much aligning that with global efforts as well. So not doing that in isolation, but looking at how does that connect. And the first one did that as well. How does that connect to other statements, things like care principles and Indigenous sovereignty and other kinds of scientific initiatives. So International Polar Year is something that happens every 30 or so years, 25. It depends. It actually goes back, the very first one was in the 1880s. And then they happen sporadically. Some really interesting things can happen out of IPY. So many people don't realize that the Antarctic Treaty actually came out of the IPY from 1959 to 61. So it's not only a scientific endeavor, but it can actually have huge influence on things like geopolitics. And so the next one is scheduled to happen in 2032. The last one that I mentioned was 2007, 2009. And some of us are old enough that we actually participated in the last one and may be around for the next one as well. And so what we're trying to do now, and what we want to talk about a bit in this session, is how do we position ourselves to make sure that the next IPY, that we're ready for it, and that we're connecting as a community to the broader global community. Because as Mark said, what we're dealing with in the Arctic, the Antarctic, is not specific to those regions, right? There's not only the physical teleconnections, but now we're seeing, you can find hundreds of articles in the last couple of years about the geopolitics of the Arctic in particular. So very important in that regard. And to that end, we've heard a lot about this here at this conference, Indigenous data sovereignty. What we're trying to do is ensure that our community, not just the data community, but also broader science community, research community, is aware of their responsibilities and what they need to know going in. And we don't have a prescriptive, how to, but at least providing them with the foundations on the types of things that they need to do as they go into their research projects. So we will rely on our Indigenous partner organizations like Inuit Circumpolar Council, Inuit Tapiri Kanatami in Canada, First Nations Information Government Center, and so on. There are many others out there. We've all talked here about the care principles many times, and there's a lot happening in this space. One of the other things that we're trying to do is we're trying to link the more sort of national and even subnational to this international endeavor. So an example is the Canadian Consortium for Arctic Data Interoperability. There are a group of us in Canada who were actually quite active internationally, but then we looked in our own backyard and said, hey, there are all these people working in this country and we're not connected. And so we formed what was then called CCADI. It's now been renamed the Canadian Polar Data Consortium, and we created a formal legal entity last December. It's a not-for-profit that links together about 20 plus partners. Many of those are university-based data repositories, but there are other federal agencies, Indigenous organizations, and so on. And so what we've been doing is we're working at the national level to make those linkages, the interoperability, the policy, and so on, but then linking those to the international space. And for example, what came out of our last major award, I'm now spending the month of November in Norway working with the Arctic Passion folks to connect our infrastructure to their infrastructure, and that group has, I think, 80 partners. And so we're trying to build it in pieces, but making sure that it has that global connection, and in turn connecting those to global infrastructures. So next week, as I mentioned, we have the 6th Polar Data Forum. The first one was, I believe, in actually Masaki and his group in Japan hosted it in 2013. And so they got us really kicked us off as a global community and brought it together. And then a number of people have picked up on that and kept it going. So the next one will be next week in Hobart, and the Australian Antarctic Division will be hosting. And we'll be doing a number of things. You see all of the various topics there that we're going to be addressing. But a big part of it is that we will be having an IPY polar year planning session. And for some people, they're saying, well, that's 2032. Like, why are you thinking about that now? But for something of that scope, where you have, tens at least of countries, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, concentrated activities, the last time we realized we didn't have enough lead time. It was, a few years, people were thinking, okay, that's a bit rushed, and it was. We achieved a lot, but this time we're trying to get out in front. So it's actually been a couple of years now already. We've been having meetings and so on, and we're now pushing forward to try and bring together a really cohesive plan for data management for that initiative. So. With that, I will say thank you. I'm kind of ADC emeritus now, but I work closely with Chantelle and the group and are still doing some activities. But if you want more information about the ADC in particular or any of these activities, you can reach out to Chantelle or Mark or others. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Peter. Any questions for Peter before he sits down? But I think you can see this is the issue. He just listed like 25 things that we're supposed to be coordinating with, and how do we do that? Okay, we're going to go to the other hemisphere now, and to this other to the South Pole, and hear from Michaela Miller.
Good job. Sorry, I'm a bit short. Hi, Michaela Miller. I'm from the Southern Ocean Observing System. I'm the data officer for the organization. It's an international organization, so we sit at the University of Tasmania, based in Hobart, Tasmania, or Nipa Luna Lucerita. But we're actually an international organization with most of our money coming from around the world. Before I talk a bit more about the Southern Ocean, I just want to give a bit of an acknowledgement of country. So both the Palawa people of Lucerita as the traditional owners of where I live and work, and then also the Turrbal and Yagara people of Minjin as the traditional owners of the land that we gather on today, and acknowledge their elders past, present, and emerging, recognize their deep connection to country, and also acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded as we gather on stolen land. So I'll give a bit of a background of the Southern Ocean Observing System, or SOOS as we like to call it, mission. Our mission is to facilitate the sustained collection and delivery of essential observations of the Southern Ocean to all relevant stakeholders through the design, advocacy, and implementation of cost-effective observing and data delivery systems. It's a mouthful. And one of the main things that is, I suppose, at the heart of SOOS is data sharing. And so our aim is to support the development of systems that kind of maximize the discoverability, access, and impact of Southern Ocean observations, no matter who's collected them, when they've been collected, or why they've been collected, to be honest. And so we accomplish this by providing two products that I'd like to talk about today. They're our main products, which I'll now go over. So the first one is SOOSmap. SOOSmap is our interactive web portal for oceanographic data visualization and dissemination. It's developed and hosted by the European Marine Observations and Data Network, or EMONET Physics. And we have both an ERDAP and a GeoServer sitting in the back end, and all of our metadata in a GeoNetwork that links up. We provide curated and standardized data and metadata from the Southern Ocean with over 60 data sets with over 50,000 observations from all disciplines. So that includes biology, geology, chemistry, and physical oceanography. So a lot of standardization to kind of cross-discipline those, which is difficult, as I'm sure you're all aware. And then our second product is called Due South. So this is a database of upcoming expeditions in the Southern Ocean. It's hosted by the European Polar Board in their Polar Deck system, and so this could also be used to look at the Arctic expeditions as well. They've just got a filter sitting on top of it that you can do Antarctic view, but I believe it was originally designed for Arctic expeditions. And so its aim is to provide who is going, where are they going, when are they going, what they're doing, how do they get there, how do I contact them, do they have berths available, can I hop on their boat, type of information. And so from a Southern Ocean community perspective, we have our sights set on the 5th IPY, the International Polar Year, but prior to this, we're actually mainly focusing on another international collaborative initiative called Antarctica in Sync. And this is aimed at synchronizing research across Antarctica. Oof. It has several science themes, including heat, freshwater carbon, elements and cycles, rapid sea ice decline, melting ice sheets and ice shelves, and the coastal impacts of those, understanding the biology, including how to protect them, anthropogenic impacts, and aerosol cloud interactions. So a very, very wide breadth of disciplines and research goals. There's currently several working groups targeting these science themes. Applications are still available if you happen to be working in the Southern Ocean and you're interested. They close at the end of the year. But our aim is essentially to synchronize collective collections of data across Antarctica and then have this lead into the IPY. So kind of have some lessons learned, do a bit of a trial run, connect up with the IPY teams as well, and make sure everything aligns so it could feed right into it. So a bit of challenges with Southern Ocean research. It's been talked about. It's probably the same challenges that most research face if you're doing research that crosses across disciplines. Specifically from the Southern Ocean, we really struggle with who is doing what and when. The Southern Ocean is in international waters, and all of the programs are from different countries. Some communication between countries is very great, some communication is not. Some people want to share their plans, some people don't. I completely understand it, but it does make it difficult to try to coordinate efforts. There's, of course, a lot of legacy projects that have been sitting across data repositories in different nations. There's not necessarily any sort of aggregation of those for some of those projects, and they've often been called different things over the years. So it's really hard to understand what's been done already and what can be added on top of data that already exists. The sharing of methodologies, we're definitely getting better at it, but it's something that's at the forefront of our mind as we kind of head into these international initiatives, so we make sure that collection is standardized as much as possible, at least within disciplines and hopefully across disciplines, so the data can be interoperable. There's various standards applied, and there's also the lack of standards for some disciplines, so those need to be created and actually disseminated and a consensus reached that those should be applied to those data, such as like biological data. There's a bit of a discrepancy about what standards should be used. And then projects often end with the obligation to put into a national repository if there's an obligation at all. Funding doesn't really ever cross borders, and so there's often a broken link between international and data aggregators. And so all of the data is sitting across in all these different repositories. There's not many systems put in place to actually bring those things together, especially for large international initiatives. And so, at least from a SEUS perspective, I just want to share some of the ways that we can contribute, and we're hoping to contribute. We would like to data share via SEUS maps, so improve our functionality of that to help support initiatives like InSync and then also IPY, using InSync as kind of a trial run and a guinea pig for IPY. Help facilitate creation and promotion of best practices and data management plans. We've got working groups that kind of span global organizations. And so if we can help facilitate and promote kind of best practices across disciplines, I think we're well suited to get those plans out. Improve data flows of national data activities into due south. At the moment, it is me scouring the web and emailing people to try to get people to put plans into our product, which does not work very well. So actually making that a requirement of these large projects. If they want to participate, they actually make their plans available to the people so they know what's going on in advance. And then also alongside that, improved functionality of due south. So linking up projects, having some links up to like project web pages and more information, improved filtering and whatnot. And so yeah, that's me. Yeah, from a Southern Ocean perspective. If you want to get in touch, there's my email. Or if you want to visit SUSMAP.
Hiya, thanks for the talk. I'm a former data manager at the UK Polar Data Centre, but now I'm a PhD researcher in Ireland. My question was, do you include people who do research on cruise ships on due south? Because that's growing a lot, and I know that IATO has, I think, kind of a database of people who are considered expeditioners and field researchers, and I wasn't sure if that's something that's in there.
Yes, we currently have it's one of the few automated feeds up to due south, and so we're hoping to have more automated feeds in the future. But the IATO reports it's the one feed that directly goes into due south. There is a jitter that's imposed on it because they don't necessarily want to give their exact locations of where they've gone, and so they put a bit of a scattering of their GPS, a bit of a buffer, so you don't know specifically where they are, but you know the region that they've gone, essentially.
Anyone else? I'll just double check online. Okay, now we're getting into the fun part. Oh, yep. Okay, sorry.
Raina Broadhurst from the World Data System International Technology Office, work with Chantelle, who's online. But I had a question about SEUS and its connection to the Global Ocean Observing System and how it's also integrating into the Ocean Data Information System, or is that happening? Just if you can elaborate what you're doing in regards to that.
Yeah, so we operate as kind of I don't know if node is the right word for Global Ocean Observing System. We sit underneath them, but more to the side. So we're associated with them, but we also are not associated with them. I don't know the technicalities of why that is, unfortunately, but I can ask and get back to you on that.
And Otis?
Oh, we don't have any integration at the moment with Otis, but it is on a very long list of things to be looking into, for sure.
Highlighting the issues that we're trying to address today. Anybody else? Okay, so if you all go to the session description, you'll find a link to breakout notes. I think we have enough people for like 2 breakouts. Chantelle, as far as I know, you're the only person online. So I will just zoom in with you and connect you to one of the breakout groups. Let me get this up. There's no mouse. Okay, this is our core question. How can we be more integrated and more autonomous at the same time? How can we serve our local needs and connect globally, particularly in this context of large-scale science initiatives? So here's the approach we're going to take. We'll break out into like 2 groups, spend about 10 minutes to identify tensions. It's kind of small, sorry. between a desire to standardize and the request for more customizing or autonomy. And try and be fairly specific. You know, come up with a particular issue that you're grappling with that you all can agree on. So this might be a social problem. You know, so my community, geochemicists, field ecologists, anthropologists, whoever they are, have been using this system for so long and it works for them, and they're not particularly interested in broadening their user base, even though there is a demand for the data outside their community. So you're getting a demand from an outside community, and your data providers are like, we don't care, we got our thing. That's just one example. Or it might be a more technical example. You know, you have two communities who want to interconnect, and you have similar or related data. You think that they would be able to connect fairly easily, but they have different data models, different schemas, different vocabularies, whatever it might be that creates a tension. So try and identify, you know, a fairly specific tension that you want to address. Spend about 10 minutes on that, you know, just brainstorm a bit in your little group and then pick one. And then, so then pick one, and then ask yourself, you know, what is the rationale for standardizing? What is the rationale for customizing? And then try and develop some action steps that would achieve standardization. You know, so in the technical example, okay, we need to do some mapping across vocabularies, or we need to change our data model, or what have you. In a social example, you know, maybe we need to do some outreach, whatever it might be. So just come up with some examples of things that would either standardize or customize. Then, so spend about, you know, 10, 15 minutes doing that. And then I identify if there's any of those actions that would boost both, or if you can merge some to boost both. And that would, you know, advance both customization and standardization. It sounds odd, but I think as we get down into the specifics, I've done this sort of thing before, you'll find that there is sometimes some actions there. And then prioritize what seems like the most promising that would promote both integration and autonomy, and identify people, you know, and systems and institutions that would be involved in doing this, you know, the actual actors in actually doing this work. So I'm asking you all to get fairly specific, you know, so just pick an example. We're not going to solve the global problem here, but we're trying to solve a couple particular issues that hopefully, you know, might work as sort of patterns or templates that we can use going forward. Figure out what you want to report back. We'll have a couple minutes for report back, and there we go. So did you all manage to get into the, at least two people need to get into the breakout documents. Any questions on that? Does that all make sense? Okay, so I think I am just going to count people off. 1, 2. No, 1. It's only 2. So 1, 2, 1. There in the back. Oh, Matt, you're running away on us? Gentleman there? Sorry, I was just a presenter from the last. Okay, you're not joining us? Okay. Do you want to participate? Sorry, what was that? Do you want to participate in our breakout groups? Not really. I wasn't listening. Okay. Masaki, I believe you're 2. Oh, okay. You're 1? 1. All right. So all the 1s maybe go back there. All the 2s maybe go up here. And Chantelle, I will just connect to the Zoom, and if there is anybody else online, please connect to the Zoom, and we'll connect you into one of the groups just via a laptop. Sorry about that. This is Chantelle right here.
Oh, okay.
Right. Hi, I'm Rebecca Cowley. I'm from CSIRO here in Australia. Ooh. Okay, so we had a couple of topics, but we ended up talking about mine, which is very nice. But it's a simple one. We have, I'm part of the XBT, Expendable Bathythermograph data collection group, which sits under the Global Ocean Observing System. So I'm leading a group who is managing that data, and we've come together. We have people from multiple institutions around the world coordinating their data set. So this instrument is the same across all the institutions, and it has been the same since the 1960s. It hasn't changed. The recording system has changed. But we're still having trouble standardising our formats and our location of the data. We have, everybody has their own repository and their own format and their own use of the data. But it's simple, you know, it's just temperature and depth. It sounds simple, but it's not. So we're having trouble with just this small situation, standardising and customising. So the rationale, what was the question? What's the rationale for standardising? And what's the rationale for customising? So we came up, well, the rationale for standardising is making the data available for everybody in one format. And also, you know, there's issues with depth calculations, and people have applied different depth calculations over time. So getting that correct would be very helpful. Getting the QC coordinated as well, getting rid of bad data, etc., etc. So if we standardise too much, though, that makes everybody's life down, you know, their systems they've built up over multiple years would have to change. And their invested time in those systems and how they get the data out and how they QC it and how they make it available to their researchers. So we've tried to make, I guess, the next step then is to, well, why bother? What's the incentive for standardising the data? You know, people don't have time or money at the moment, especially in the US, and we've lost researchers who are invested in these data sets. So, so I guess, you know, the incentive perhaps would be public good. At the moment, that's all we've got. We don't have funding. The next thing we talked about was identifying actions that boost standardisation and customisation. So perhaps creating working groups and creating customised concrete plans with times and steps in place. Customisation of metadata standards and minimum standards would be required, but we're building flexibility around those requirements, optional items and required items. We're trying to get users involved in the group and make sure everyone's consulted and that the steps forward agree and work for their workflows. Funding was an issue that we just cannot solve, so I'm happy to hear any ideas around funding and global funding. And yes, we identified the main players, which I can tell you if you want, but I've written them down. Funders, unknowns.
Okay, great, thank you.
There you go.
Any questions or clarification for? Okay, I'll summarize ours quite quickly. It was somewhat similar. Our attention was getting some level of consistency from data providers, enough consistency to be integrated into our systems. But we recognize that, just like you all did, we can't go too far in standardization. Sometimes standardization is just standardization for standardization's sake. And so we need to make it easier for researchers to provide context for their data. The key piece is the context, that we're not going to worry about formats. We can deal with formats. And so really try and recognize the stuff that we can easily deal with, that we don't have to hassle researchers about, and focus on what we really do need to get from researchers. And that we want to take advantage of these big international programs, particularly in their early phases, like with IPY, to help promote this being a norm. So that, you know, maybe in terms of getting your IPY project approved, you need to watch a little 5-minute video on good data hygiene. So that there's a, you know, some basic knowledge ahead of time. As Steve put it, you know, we don't want to always be steering after the fact, correcting past problems. We want to, you know, steer before the fact to correct it before it happens. And that, so, and then we want to demonstrate that there's good value in having clean data, because, so it's incumbent upon us as data professionals to show that if they have clean data, then, you know, it immediately shows up in a portal, or it's immediately integrated with other data so that they get value from it. And that so the bottom line sort of was that data researchers need to step up a bit, and data managers need to chill a bit. And so just to wrap things up, I'm going to carry this. We have the Polar Data Forum next week, and we have a IPY planning session amongst many other things. I'm going to try and synthesize some of this and carry this forward into because what part of the planning for the IPY session is developing recommendations for the planning group and identifying resources that they can use. So this will feed into that. So I hope you found this a useful session. Thank you all very much for your participation.